Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, Mishnah 15, Mishnah 16, which is the last Mishnah of chapter 2. Hello, dear friends. So last time in Mishnah 15, which was the first of the two Mishnahs of Rabbi Tarfon, I explained that Rabbi Tarfon is not one of the 5 students mentioned of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. But there are 2 possibilities, or maybe 3 possibilities, why his Mishnayot are mentioned here at the end of chapter 2. Since we are introducing the new leadership in Eretz Yisrael after the destruction of the temple, whereby Hillel is again linked in a new way with his student Yochanan ben Zakkai and Yochanan ben Zakkai's students. So Rabbi Tarfon, on the one hand, was a student of Yochanan ben Zakkai, but also was a colleague, because he was already a Torah scholar before Yochanan ben Zakkai took over the Kerem B'Yavneh after the destruction of the temple. So that's one reason for him to be here, even though his colleague Rabbi Akiva will be mentioned in the next chapter. Secondly, actually, there is a link in an idiom here, and some others point this out too, because Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach in Mishnah 14, when he said, "You havei shakud lemod Torah, be diligent in the study of Torah, and know what to say to a heretic, and know before whom you are toiling," he also says, "Ne'eman hu ba'al malachtecha sheishalem lecha schar pulatecha." Your employer is faithful that he is going to pay you your reward. And Rabbi Tarfon in today's Mishnah says this exact same saying. He says, "Ne'eman hu ba'al malachtecha sheishalem lecha schar pulatecha." Your employer, meaning God, is faithful that he will pay you your reward. So it's interesting that they both say the exact same thing, and there are those who think that's one of the reasons why Rabbi Tarfon here is mentioned. But it also could be that this was a saying that floated around at the time. And so Rabbi Tarfon then is both, as I said, a colleague of Yochanan ben Zakkai, considered one of the greats of that generation, and also a student at the same time. It's not unusual. Rabbi Meir was both a colleague and a student of Rabbi Akiva. We had other things like that too. So what does Rabbi Tarfon say? But before I say that, I found another link to this issue. And the third link is avot Rabbi Natan. Now, avot Rabbi Natan, what he does is after, if you remember our Mishnah, early on in this chapter, when it talked about the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it says, Hu haya moneh shivchan, that he had these 5 students, and he would talk about, this was already in Mishnah 8, and he would sing their praises. So avot Rabbi Natan, which I said is sort of like a Gemara on the Masechet Avot, I say sort of like because it doesn't really have the discussion that a Talmudic discussion would have, but in the sense that it's written at a period which is very close to the period of the Moraim. So it opens up in chapter 18 saying, Ula Negdan, and parallel this, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. What does it mean parallel this? Meaning parallel the fact that Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 students that he used to sing praises about. So here it says Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi used to sing praises about another 5. And who are the other 5? Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So the avot Rabbi Natan says that paralleling these 5 students of Yochanan ben Zakkai, there were another 5 great scholars who Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, later on, the redactor of the Mishnah, who starts this chapter, by the way, who lives really at the end of the 2nd century of the Common Era. So he would sing the praises of these. Let me read you what it says here. We'll find that this same statement mentioned here, avot Rabbi Natan, is found in the Talmud Masechet Gittin 67a. So Yehuda HaNasi says, about these five scholars. About Rabbi Tarfon, he calls them Gal Avanim, or there are those who say Gal Egozim, and Gal Egozim is the one that it says in Gittin. What is Gal Avanim? It means a mound of stones, or there are those who say a mound of walnuts. Why? If you take away one, they all fall down, make a lot of noise. What does the metaphor mean? It means if you came over to Rabbi Tarfon and asked him a question about something he said, he would supply you with so many sources that you would have plenty to take home after that. This is the way Rabbi Tarfon was. If a scholar came over to him and asked him something and said, teach me something, he would teach him something from Mikra, from the Torah, from the Mishnah, from the Midrash, from the Halacha, from the Agada, and he would leave Malay Birkav Kol Tuv. He would leave with plenty. So that's the way he was. It's like a mound of things that came pouring at you every time you asked him a question. Rabbi Akiva was called Otsar Balum, somebody who has so much categorized storage. And then they explained about Kibbutz Eliezer ben Azariah, etc. Now, this same notion about the five scholars, but not connected to our Mishnah, we find in Gittin 67a, in the name of Isi ben Yehuda. So Isi ben Yehuda used to tell the praise of these Chachamim. Rabbi Meir, he called him a sage and a scribe, Chacham v'Sofer. Rabbi Yehuda, he called him Chacham lichshirtzeh, meaning a scholar anytime he wanted, even if he was under duress. Rabbi Tarfon, he called him Gal Shel Egozim, a mound of walnuts, like we just saw now. Rabbi Ishmael, Chanut Miuzenet, which means a stocked up, supplied shop. Rabbi Akiva, Otsar Balum, the same thing it says here, a storage house compartmentalized. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Kupad Rochlim, Eliezer ben Azariah, here you have more than five. But again, you have the same idea. But here in Avot Rabbi Natan, it ties this idea together with, if we had these five students of Yochanan ben Zakkai, we have five students which start with Rabbi Tarfon of scholars in the next generation, and therefore here's the first. That's the way they present, which is also interesting. Okay, so what does our Mishnah say today about Rabbi Tarfon? Again, just as I said last time, these idioms in Pirkei Avot, you always wonder if they said them. Concerning Rabbi Tarfon, it really sounds like this is something he said, because they're very enigmatic and very allegoric in the way they're written. Here he says, Lo alechem lacha ligmor. You do not have to finish the work. V'lo ata ben chorin li batel mimena, but you are not free to not do it. Im lamada Torah harbe, if you studied a lot of Torah, you get a lot of reward. Notim l'cha sachar harbe. And your employer is faithful. Ne'emanu bal malachtacha. This is a saying which I mentioned, was mentioned before too. Shishalem l'cha schubatecha, that he's going to pay you your reward. Don't worry about it. And then he adds, and know that the reward for the righteous is only in the future, which is usually translated as the world to come. What does this mean? Well, a lot of the Bartanura explains that it's talking about the study of Torah, which means you don't have to study endlessly because your life is finite, but you must study. And if you study a lot of Torah, you get a lot of reward. However, as I said last time, I see it differently. I think that because what we know about Rabbi Tarfon, especially when he said Maseh Gadol, that the action is greater, when he says the Malacha, he's talking about doing mitzvah, the masim tovim, the mitzvahs and the good deeds in this world, which means lo alechem lacha ligmor. You'll never accomplish everything you wanted to do, but you have to do. The fact that you're not going to accomplish does not allow you to resign yourself from doing anything. You know, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, I'm just going to use this as an allegory, as an interpretation, has a famous statement where he says, Kol olam kolo gesher tzar me'od. The whole world is like a narrow bridge. And the main thing is not to make yourself afraid. However, it's a very puzzling statement. If the whole world is like a narrow bridge, isn't the point of a bridge to get from one point A to point B? So what does it mean the main thing is not to make yourself afraid? That's not the point of a bridge. Now, it's true, if it's a very narrow bridge and you're afraid and you start looking in the water under the bridge, you might fall in. Whereas if you have a goal and you follow that goal, you have more chance of getting over that bridge if you feel secure. So Nachman, and this is very typical of Nachman, Nachman is basically saying in this statement, the whole world's a narrow bridge and the main thing is not to be afraid, because the point of the bridge is not to get to the other side for Nachman. You see, we live in a world where we are judged by accomplishment, but God does not judge us by physical accomplishment. How many businesses we had, how much money we took in? No, because in a sense, accomplishment, you can try a lot of things and they not work, not even because it's your fault. So life is not about accomplishment materially. It's about how you live your life in the span that you have, whether it's a short or a long span, whether it's with difficulties or without, how you're going to live your life, what you're going to do in that time, that is what you're judged by. Life is not about accomplishment. You don't have to finish the labor, but you must toil in it. And if you take every step on that bridge with confidence, with direction, with significance, believing in your values, that's what it's about. So you don't have to finish the labor, but you cannot resign yourself from it. And of course, if you studied a lot of Torah, the first part was about mitzvot u'masim tovim, now it goes back to Torah, you will receive a great reward. And your employer is faithful to pay you that reward. And then he adds another thing. You should know. Matan scharan shel tzadikim latid lavo. Doesn't have a vav here, by the way. Of course, it says vida. I know. I'm saying it doesn't say shematan scharan. Know that. Just know. The reward for the righteous is not in this world. It's in a future time, what we call the world to come. Remember, Rabbi Tarfon is living in a difficult time after the destruction of the temple, with now Roman non-Jewish leadership in Judea. Life is not simple. And if you remember, you have the 10 martyrs, including Rabbi Akiba, who were killed by the Romans at different times, possibly for the involvement in the Bar Kokhba revolt. So you can have righteous people who suffer in this world because the reward is not in this world. The Mishnah in general has difficulty with the whole question of why righteous suffer, but that's not unusual because according to the Talmud, Moses asked that question to God. Talmud says in Brachot, chapter 1. And Jeremiah in chapter 14 said, Madua derech hashayim salecha, why do the wicked prosper? So this idea that the reward for the righteous in the world to come is a way of dealing with a difficult situation. It's not a full answer, because why should righteous have to suffer even in this world? But at least understanding that the reward is not in this world puts it into some type of a perspective. So just like there's a reward in the world to come for the study of Torah and the toil, the reward for the righteous is in the world to come. Now, there are some things that the Mishnah in Peah says, there are things that you benefit you in this world, and the main part of the reward is in the world to come. Mishnah in Peah, achnasat kalal, vayat hamet, bringing a bride to the canopy, and giving respect to last respects to at a funeral, etc. And there are other things mentioned there. So, but still, this the idea that the schar mitzvot b'hai al maleka, like the Talmud says in Kiddushi, the reward for the commandments is not in this world. So this is also something, once he's talking about reward, he wants to make it clear. Just one last thing. The Rambam, when he talks about this, he says, but why in Parshat Kitavo and Parshat Bechukotai, the Torah seems to be promising worldly rewards for keeping the mitzvot. Im bechukotai talechel, if you go in my precepts, then the land will give its produce. And the trees will blossom. And you'll have plenty of food from your grain. And there will be the sword will not go through your land, there'll be peace, etc. So the Torah seems to be promising rewards for keeping the mitzvah in this world. Armani says, number one, this is a collective reward. But secondly, says Maimonides, and even more importantly, this is not exactly a reward. It's taking away the obstacles. If you live in a time of war, it's very hard to study Torah, do mitzvot, and achieve the things you want to achieve in this world, the good things you wanted to do. But if you remove these obstacles and you're able to live in a time of peace, it gives you that time to do something with yourself, to materialize these goals in some way, all your good ambitions. So Rambam basically says that what it's talking about then is, I think it's in his Shmona Prakim, the 8 chapters, that what it does is it gives you the possibility to remove these obstacles. So the Torah promises that God will remove the national obstacles that can affect every individual, give us peace and plenty and health, so that we're able to do all the things that we really like to do. And obviously the wicked don't need that, only the good. And therefore, if the collective is good, then the collective deserves such a thing. So this is the way Rabbi Tarfon ends off the chapter. The reward is in the world to come. And the next chapter, chapter Shlishi, will be talking about other people living in the 2nd century of Judea at the time. And I wish everybody, we're just before the Sukkot holiday, Chag Sameach, Chag Kasher v'Sameach, have a very happy Sukkot holiday, which the Torah calls the time of our happiness, Zman Simchatenu. Shalom, shalom.